Yeah, so my name is Robert. I'm one of the core contributors to Mobius, and Mobius, as of the past couple of weeks, is the leading DEX on Cello. Yeah. So, um, with that, we've been actually able to gain a lot of user traction, and for the past couple of really years and months, you've seen that a ton of volume has been traded on-chain through these AMMs. So as we're going about designing Mobius v2, we're really thinking about ways to push the boundaries of what a constant function market maker is supposed to be. So to start off, I'm going to give just a very high-level overview of what constant function market makers are, their definitions, and sort of the innovations that have been taking place. So yeah, what is a constant function market maker? That is a great question if anybody was wondering. So constant function market makers are effectively a subclass of automated market makers. They're really cool in the sense that they use a trading function to determine if a trade is accepted or denied. A trading function, the way I like to sort of formalize it is, it's just a rule that is algorithmically programmed. And then as you can see, the trading function is effectively an aggregate of the reserves. So a trade will be accepted or rejected based on the amount of reserves that are available in the pool. And what makes constant function market makers so awesome and unique is that they provide really fantastic instant liquidity. So that trading function that a constant function market maker has is effectively the way to price your asset. So if an automated market maker quotes a price and you accept it, liquidity is provided instantaneously. And then another really great reason why they're so successful on chain is because high fees have been really preventative for things like order books that are more capital efficient and more widely used in traditional finance. So the holy grail of a constant function market maker is the one that you see a lot with, with fork projects, but really implemented well by Uniswap. And that's the constant product invariant. It's effectively the holy grail, as you say. It's super simplistic, but it's deeply profound. And there's been a lot of innovation around the constant product invariant. But the constant product invariant is the trading function that allows for the most variety of assets being traded. It forms this really cool hyperbolic curve that LPs can provide to. And so that hyperbolic curve is essentially liquidity providers providing to a range of 0 to infinity. And then usually you only have 2 assets. That's one of the limitations of a constant product curve, but we'll kind of get into that a little bit later too. So Mobius, as some of you might know, is a stable swap exchange. We use a stable swap invariant that was pioneered by Ergoff. So essentially what happens is it's this hybridization between the constant sum and constant product. Constant sum is really where the constant is the sum of x and y. And then you have also A, which is this amplification coefficient that allows you to move the curve a little bit depending on the balance of the pool, which is really, really cool for things like large trades. Yeah, so for people that are interested in kind of seeing how this looks like, you see the stable swap invariant is this a little bit more zoomed in hyperbolic curve, whereas the Uniswap invariant is this really beautiful hyperbolic curve that they still use today. And then the constant price is just this straight linear curve. So geometric mean market makers. So this is another type of constant function market maker. It's also a subclass. Balancer is the one that pioneered it to effectively create index funds. They wanted to support multi-asset trades, and they wanted to support more specific and customizable LP payoffs. So they effectively created what is known as a geometric mean market maker. I don't know how to add a summation in the Google slides. Otherwise, I would have done that. But effectively, you're adding weight vectors to the trading function. and that would be formalized by sort of a summation. So LP and arbitrage dynamic. That is probably one of the most important things with an automated market maker is you need to be able to balance out liquidity providers and arbitrageurs, right? You want arbitrageurs to effectively balance the price to some sort of reference price because that's really, really important. But then at the same time, arbitrageurs take away from liquidity providers because they're effectively trading against the assets of liquidity providers. Really, really smart guy, Alex Evans, came out with a paper called Optimal Fees for Geometric Mean Market Makers, where he kind of discusses this, this dichotomy and ways to figure out the optimal trading fee. Nested AMMs, this is also one of the core innovations that I really, really like. This was essentially formalized by Professor Anthony Zhang, really cool guy, by the way. He essentially found a relationship between utility functions and economics and related that back to constant function market makers. So as you can see, the trading function is essentially an aggregate of utility functions. This can support more multi-asset trades, which is really cool. So it's very similar to like to Balancer in the sense, and stable swap meta pools, but it is a little bit more flexible, which I really like. And it's related to CES utility functions in economics for any econ whizzes out there. Uniswap v3. So Uniswap v3 is essentially concentrated liquidity. It's probably where the majority of trading volume happens now on chain. And that is essentially mimicking a pro rata order book. So pro rata sort of meaning price first execution. And what's really cool is they essentially have these logarithmically spaced ticks on a constant product curve. So they sort of compress them, and you can simulate any sort of curve you want, like a constant product market curve, if you will, or a constant sum curve, or something like a stable swap invariant. And this is really unique because you create this universal AMM that Dan Robinson describes, but there are limitations like non-fungible liquidity positions and so on. Last but not least, you have replicating market makers. So replicating market makers is an innovation formalized by Ingerish, and he essentially showed that you can construct any sort of trading function from a portfolio value function. What that essentially means is you can replicate any type of payoff that you want as long as it's concave. And one thing that Lambert showed, who's a professor in physics, is he was able to show that you can replicate a covered call by localizing to one tick space in Uniswap v3. So primitive finance is a replicating market maker that effectively is creating like a covered call strategy. And if you can have a covered call strategy that's separate from Uniswap v3, then you can all of a sudden entertain trading volume, right? Like the arbitrage between them, which is essentially allowing for better price discovery for things like derivatives and options, which is really fantastic. So when we're thinking about Mobius v2, we're thinking about AMMs, right? And one thing that we're really excited about is this path to order book-like AMMs. Now, this is a bit controversial. A lot of people are like, let's have passive liquidity providing. That's the innovation of AMMs. But at the end of the day, order books are more capital efficient. And the assumption that we make at the Mobius team is that active liquidity providers will beat passive liquidity providers in the long run. So things like just-in-time liquidity in Uniswap v3 is a really good indicator of that. But there are benefits to constant function market makers, like you can better characterize LP payoffs. The LP shares, so the liquidity providing shares, are highly composable with other applications, things like that. And so other questions that we also have that are sort of open-ended and can be answered by anyone here. Can we have a nested AMM that enables swaps of LP shares? So of things like if you have an automated market maker and that is essentially just a pool of liquidity, can that pool of liquidity be denominated by LP shares instead of tokens itself? Other open questions we have is how do we aggregate assets into a singular pool while reducing or keeping risk to a minimum, like Balancer, right? They have a multi-asset pool, but with that, there's more risk that is associated with it. And then lastly, can we mimic an order book, but also specifically the type of execution model that an order book has? Order books use different execution models. Some have priority time execution models. Some have pro rata execution models. Uniswap v3 specifically doing pro rata execution. So lastly, but not least, and this is the thing that we're most excited about, is Mobius v2 and the essential idea, philosophy, and ambition that we have with Mobius v2 is to really build this universal automated market maker, right? So the question that we're trying to answer from a research perspective is, can we replicate a broader range of trading functions by localizing liquidity along a different curve? So Uniswap v3 is essentially localizing liquidity with their tick spaces on a constant product curve. But that means that the type of trading functions that they can approximate for or simulate are really limited. So you can't do things like time-weighted automated market makers. You can't do things like multi-asset pools. And the really cool part about things like time-weighted automated market makers is you can get into things like zero coupon bonds and more derivative instruments. So if you are able to replicate a broader range of trading functions, truly, all types of automated market makers, then perhaps you can really create this universal automated market maker that can be asset agnostic, that can trade any sort of financial product. And that is what we hope to do with Mobius v2, and then potentially even launch to other EVM chains and explore the multi-chain world. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks, guys. Happy to answer questions, too, afterwards.